The fluorescent lights of Courtroom B cast a harsh, unforgiving glare on Jasmine Mitchell's weary face. She had dressed carefully that morning. A crisp navy blue blazer over a white blouse, her hair meticulously braided, every detail calculated to present herself as the professional educator she was. Yet none of that seemed to matter now. Judge Robert Hartley shifted uncomfortably in his elevated chair, his weathered hands gripping the gavel with a sense of practiced authority that spoke of decades on the bench. The citation was simple: a broken taillight and an allegedly improper lane change. What should have been a routine traffic violation had metamorphosed into something far more sinister. Jasmine remembered the traffic stop with painful clarity. Officer Thompson, a name she had committed to memory, had approached her car with a predatory intensity that made her heart race. His body camera captured their interaction, a dance of calculated microaggressions that began the moment he approached her window. License and registration, he had demanded, his tone revealing more than his words. Jasmine had complied immediately, her movements slow and deliberate, hands visible at all times. She knew the script too well. The delicate choreography of survival for a black woman during a routine traffic stop. The violation itself was minimal. A taillight with a hairline crack, barely visible unless one was looking for it. The lane change citation was even more dubious, a judgment call that seemed more about harassment than actual traffic safety. But here, in this courtroom, those details seemed almost irrelevant. Judge Hartley's eyes never quite met Jasmine's. They would dart around the courtroom, settle on his papers, scan the back wall. Anywhere but directly at her. It was a subtle form of dehumanization, a refusal to acknowledge her full personhood. Ms. Mitchell, he had intoned, his voice a blend of bureaucratic detachment and underlying condescension. The court finds you in violation of Municipal Traffic Code 24.3, Section B. The fine will be set at $5,000, with court costs to be assessed separately. $5,000. The number hung in the air like a physical weight. For Jasmine, it represented more than a monetary penalty. It was a tax on her existence, a financial punishment that went far beyond a simple traffic infraction. Her mind raced to the practical implications. Her teacher's salary was modest, carefully budgeted to support herself and her son Marcus. This fine would mean dipping into their emergency savings, potentially delaying Marcus's dental work, or cutting back on school supplies she often purchased for her students who couldn't afford them. Around her, the courtroom seemed to pulse with an unspoken tension. A few spectators shifted uncomfortably. A young law clerk whispered something to another, their eyes occasionally flickering towards her. Jasmine knew that look, part sympathy, part uncomfortable recognition of a system that seemed designed to perpetuate inequity. When the gavel struck, it wasn't just a legal formality. For Jasmine, it was the sound of a system confirming what she had always known. That justice was not blind, but had very specific, very prejudiced eyes. Her lawyer, court-appointed and visibly overwhelmed, began to mumble about potential appeals. But Jasmine had stopped listening. Her mind was already mapping out the next steps, the survival strategies she had learned since childhood. This was not the end. This was just another battle in a long, ongoing war. The courthouse steps became a crucible of raw emotion and nascent revolution. Jasmine stood frozen, her body a statue of contained fury, surrounded by a growing crowd of journalists, activists, and curious onlookers. The late summer heat pressed down on her, matching the weight of the moment. Her first phone call was to her son Marcus. She deliberately kept her voice steady, refusing to let the tremble of vulnerability seep through. "I'm okay," she said, the words hanging between truth and survival. Marcus, 16, and increasingly aware of the world's complexities, heard more in her silence than in her words. Local reporters swarmed like insects, their cameras capturing every micro-expression. Ebony Williams from Channel 5 News stepped forward first, her microphone extended like a peace offering or a weapon. "Ms. Mitchell, how do you feel about the judge's ruling?" The question was standard, but Jasmine recognized the deeper invitation. to perform her pain for public consumption. She chose her words carefully. "This isn't about me," Jasmine said, her voice clear and controlled. "This is about a system that continues to criminalize Black existence under the guise of legal procedure." Unbeknownst to her, a young law student named Derek Rodriguez was recording the entire interaction on his phone. The video would later go viral, capturing not just her words, but the dignified defiance that radiated from her entire being. The courthouse plaza transformed around her. What had begun as a personal legal battle was rapidly becoming a collective moment of resistance. A group of local Black Lives Matter activists who had been monitoring the court proceedings began organizing impromptu speeches. Handmade signs emerged from bags, posters demanding judicial accountability materializing, as if by magic. Marcus Mitchell Sr., Jasmine's ex-husband and a local community organizer, arrived within the hour. Their personal relationship might have been complicated, but their commitment to community justice remained unbroken. He brought water, practical support, and a network of contacts who could amplify her story. "We're going to fight this," he assured her, his hand briefly touching her shoulder. The gesture spoke volumes. Solidarity, support, shared struggle. Social media became an instantaneous amplification chamber. The hashtag #JusticeForJasmine began trending locally, then regionally. Screenshots of the court documents, Jasmine's statement, and analysis of similar cases started circulating faster than traditional media could respond. By evening, Jasmine's phone was overwhelmed. Text messages from colleagues, fellow teachers, parents of her students, and complete strangers offering support crashed through her notifications. Some sent small amounts of money, others legal advice, many simply words of solidarity. Her school principal, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, called with unwavering support. "Take the time you need," she told Jasmine. "The school stands with you." In an era of institutional silence, such public support was revolutionary. As night fell, Jasmine sat in her small apartment, Marcus beside her. The weight of the day settled around them, not as a defeat, but as a moment of potential transformation. They ate takeout pizza, discussed the day's events, and began to strategize. This was not an ending. This was a beginning. The fine was $5,000. But the cost of silence would be immeasurably higher. The Cornerstone Baptist Church became the epicenter of Jasmine Mitchell's emerging movement. Reverend Thomas Garrett, a civil rights veteran whose activism had roots in the 1960s movement, understood immediately that this was more than just a local incident. He recognized the spark of systemic challenge that could ignite broader conversations about judicial inequity. By Wednesday evening, the church's community hall was packed. Folding chairs filled every available space, with community members standing along the walls and spilling into the adjoining rooms. The crowd was a mosaic of diversity: young activists, seasoned community leaders, local professionals, and working-class residents united by a common sense of injustice. Marcus Rodriguez, a local civil rights attorney, presented a detailed breakdown of judicial statistics. His presentation revealed a stark reality. Black women in their county were 3.7 times more likely to receive disproportionate fines compared to white counterparts for similar infractions. Charts and graphs transformed dry statistical data into a damning narrative of systemic racism. Social media amplified the movement exponentially. Local influencers and community activists like Keisha Thompson began live-streaming the meetings, creating digital platforms for those who couldn't physically attend. The hashtag #JusticeForJasmine evolved from a local trend to a regional movement, attracting attention from national civil rights organizations. Local unions became unexpected allies. The Teachers Union, where Jasmine worked, passed a unanimous resolution supporting her fight. They pledged both financial support and a commitment to challenging systemic racism within institutional structures. Similar resolutions began emerging from other professional organizations across the city. Fundraising became a strategic operation. GoFundMe campaigns, church collections, and community fundraisers began targeting not just Jasmine's fine, but creating a broader legal defense fund. Local businesses started contributing, recognizing the potential for positive community engagement. Reverend Garrett understood the importance of strategic action. He organized a multi-pronged approach: legal challenges, media engagement, and community education. "This isn't just about one fine," he told the packed church hall. "This is about dismantling a system that has perpetuated injustice for generations." Local universities became unexpected amplification points. Student organizations at State University and Community College began organizing workshops, panel discussions, and solidarity events. Law students offered pro bono research, documenting similar cases of judicial bias. Jasmine herself remained both the catalyst and the center of this emerging movement. She spoke at these gatherings with a measured passion that captivated audiences. Her background as an educator showed in how she transformed personal pain into a broader narrative of systemic change. Local media began shifting their narrative. What had initially been a small traffic violation story was now a comprehensive examination of judicial practices. Investigative journalists started digging into Judge Hartley's historical rulings, uncovering patterns of bias that had been previously overlooked. By the end of the week, the movement had transcended local boundaries. Civil rights organizations from neighboring states reached out, offering legal support and national visibility. What had begun as a personal struggle was rapidly becoming a collective movement for judicial accountability. Marcus Mitchell Sr. observed these developments with a veteran organizer's perspective. "This is how change happens," he told his son. "Not through grand gestures, but through persistent, organized community action." The $5,000 fine was no longer just Jasmine's burden. It had become a symbol of resistance, a rallying cry for justice. The Mitchell apartment was a small two-bedroom in the Oakwood Gardens complex, a modest space that carried the marks of careful budgeting and maternal love. Every corner told a story of survival and hope. Marcus's school awards pinned carefully beside family photographs, second-hand furniture strategically arranged to maximize both comfort and functionality. Jasmine's nights became a marathon of calculations. Spreadsheets filled with color-coded columns mapped out every potential financial scenario. The $5,000 fine loomed like an insurmountable mountain, threatening to collapse the delicate economic structure she had built over years of careful planning. Teaching had always been more than a job for Jasmine. It was a calling, a mission of transformation. Each month, she quietly spent nearly $300 of her own money purchasing school supplies, books, and basic necessities for her students at Westside Middle School. Many of her students came from families struggling with poverty, and Jasmine saw her classroom as a sanctuary of possibility. The fine threatened to dismantle everything. Marcus watched his mother's transformation with a mixture of admiration and concern. At 16, he was old enough to understand the systemic challenges they faced, yet young enough to still hope for simple solutions. He began taking extra shifts at the local grocery store, his earnings carefully placed into a shared emergency fund. "I can help, Mom," he would say, his voice a blend of determination and vulnerability. Jasmine's teaching performance began to show subtle signs of strain. Her colleagues noticed a momentary hesitation before answering a question, a slight tremor in her usually confident voice during staff meetings. Principal Rodriguez watched with a mixture of concern and strategic support, understanding that Jasmine's struggle was larger than an individual challenge. Healthcare became another casualty of the financial pressure. Marcus's ongoing dental work, a series of treatments to correct alignment issues, suddenly seemed like a luxury they could no longer afford. Jasmine began negotiating payment plans, her pride battling with practical necessity. Her support network became her lifeline. Her sister Rebecca, a nurse in Chicago, began sending monthly care packages, not just with food and supplies, but with carefully folded bills that felt more like love letters than financial support. Her church community started a meal rotation, ensuring the Mitchells had hot dinners without the additional burden of grocery expenses. The emotional toll was perhaps more devastating than the financial strain. Jasmine found herself experiencing what her therapist would later describe as anticipatory stress, a constant state of alertness, waiting for the next potential blow. Sleep became fragmented, with late-night spreadsheet reviews and anxiety-driven research replacing restful nights. Her digital footprint became a weapon of documentation. Every interaction with bill collectors, every communication with potential legal supporters was meticulously recorded. Jasmine understood that in a system designed to marginalize, documentation was a form of protection. Marcus Sr. stepped up his co-parenting support, offering not just financial assistance but emotional solidarity. Despite their complicated past, they presented a united front for their son. Family gatherings became strategy sessions, with extended family members contributing ideas, resources, and unwavering support. The $5,000 fine was no longer just a number. It was a representation of systemic challenges, a test of resilience, a moment that would define their family's narrative. They would not just survive. They would transform. Marcus Reynolds was not your typical civil rights attorney. At 42, he carried the weight of generational struggle in every deliberate movement. His office, tucked away in a renovated brownstone in the city's historic Black business district, was a testament to persistent hope. Walls lined with legal victories, photographs of civil rights heroes, and meticulously organized case files. When Jasmine's case landed on his desk, he recognized something beyond a simple traffic violation. The documentation she brought, screenshots, police body cam footage, court transcripts, told a story of systemic oppression that went far deeper than a broken taillight. "This isn't just about you," Reynolds told Jasmine during their first comprehensive strategy meeting. "This is about establishing a legal precedent that challenges the entire framework of judicial bias." His research team, a diverse group of young lawyers and legal researchers, began a comprehensive investigation into Judge Robert Hartley's judicial history. What emerged was a disturbing pattern. Over the past decade, Hartley had consistently issued disproportionately high fines to Black defendants, particularly Black women, for minor infractions. The legal strategy would be multifaceted. They would challenge not just the specific fine, but the underlying judicial practices that made such penalties possible. Reynolds planned to file a comprehensive civil rights lawsuit that would transform a personal incident into a systemic challenge. Jasmine's background as an educator became a crucial asset. Her articulate testimony, combined with her professional credentials, provided a powerful narrative counterpoint to potential judicial stereotyping. Reynolds coached her through potential testimony, helping her transform personal pain into strategic legal language. Local law schools became unexpected allies. Professor Elena Rodriguez from the State University's Civil Rights Legal Clinic offered her students as research assistants. They began compiling comparative data, demonstrating the statistical disparities in judicial practices. The legal team discovered something even more compelling. Judge Hartley had a history of similar rulings that had never been comprehensively challenged. Previous defendants, overwhelmed by legal costs and systemic barriers, had simply paid their fines and moved on. Marcus Mitchell Sr., with his extensive community organizing experience, helped Reynolds build a broader coalition. They began reaching out to other potential plaintiffs who had similar experiences, creating a class action framework that would amplify their legal challenge. Technical evidence became crucial. The traffic stop's body camera footage, initially thought to be a minor detail, revealed subtle interactions that suggested racial profiling. Expert witnesses were identified who could provide linguistic and behavioral analysis of the officer's conduct. Reynolds understood the psychological warfare inherent in such legal battles. "We're not just fighting a fine," he told Jasmine. "We're challenging an entire system of institutional racism that operates under the guise of legal neutrality." Funding became a strategic consideration. The community fundraising efforts, combined with support from national civil rights organizations, provided the financial runway necessary for a prolonged legal battle. They were preparing not just for a court case, but for a potential multi-year legal campaign. By the time they filed the initial legal documents, the case had transformed. What had begun as Jasmine Mitchell's personal struggle was now a carefully constructed legal instrument designed to dismantle systemic judicial bias. The lawsuit was more than a legal document. It was a declaration of resistance. The national media landscape transformed Jasmine's story into a powerful narrative of systemic injustice. MSNBC's evening news segment, hosted by Melissa Harris Perry, dedicated a full 12 minutes to unpacking the legal and social implications of the case. Her nuanced analysis transformed the incident from a local court matter into a national conversation about judicial accountability. Ebony Williams, the local Channel 5 reporter who first interviewed Jasmine on the courthouse steps, found herself at the center of a journalistic breakthrough. Her continuous coverage revealed her own passion for systemic storytelling. She began a dedicated investigative series, Justice Unequal, which meticulously documented judicial bias across the state. Social media platforms became battlegrounds of narrative construction. TikTok creators produced explainer videos breaking down the legal complexities, while Instagram activists created infographics that made the statistical disparities visually compelling. The algorithmic spread of information meant that Jasmine's story reached demographics traditionally disconnected from legal discussions. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to analyzing the case. Systemic, a popular legal analysis podcast, brought in civil rights lawyers, sociologists, and judicial experts to dissect every aspect of Judge Hartley's ruling. Their deep dive episodes attracted millions of listeners, transforming academic discourse into accessible public dialogue. Judge Robert Hartley found himself increasingly isolated. Local media outlets began investigating his entire judicial history, revealing a pattern of biased rulings that had previously gone unchallenged. Retirement seemed increasingly likely as professional and public pressure mounted. Surprisingly, conservative media outlets began covering the story with unexpected complexity. Some right-wing commentators, traditionally resistant to discussions of systemic racism, found themselves compelled by the detailed documentation of judicial overreach. This unexpected alliance created fractures in predictable political narratives. Academic institutions saw the case as a critical research opportunity. Sociology departments, law schools, and critical race theory scholars began using the Mitchell case as a primary text for understanding contemporary judicial dynamics. Doctoral students launched research projects examining the broader implications. The Mitchell family became inadvertent public figures. Marcus, still in high school, found himself invited to speak at youth leadership conferences. His perspective, a teenage son witnessing his mother's fight, resonated with young people across the country who were discovering political consciousness. National civil rights organizations recognized the strategic importance of the case. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund began providing additional legal resources, transforming what had begun as a local incident into a potential landmark civil rights challenge. Media training became crucial. Marcus Reynolds and Jasmine worked closely with communication specialists to ensure their messaging remained focused and strategic. Every interview, every public statement was carefully constructed to maintain the narrative's integrity. Unexpected allies emerged. Police reform activists, judicial accountability groups, and community organizations began seeing the case as a potential pivot point for broader systemic changes. Fundraising events, awareness campaigns, and solidarity networks expanded exponentially. Local universities hosted panel discussions that drew standing room-only crowds. Students from diverse backgrounds engaged in nuanced conversations about judicial bias, systemic racism, and community resistance. What had begun as a personal legal challenge was now a comprehensive social dialogue. By the time national networks completed their coverage, Jasmine Mitchell was no longer just an individual fighting an unjust fine. She had become a symbol of resistance, a catalyst for meaningful institutional conversation. The fine was $5,000. The potential for change, immeasurable. The speaking circuit transformed Jasmine Mitchell from a local teacher to a national voice of systemic change. Her first major address, delivered at the National Education Conference in Chicago, marked a pivotal moment of personal and professional metamorphosis. Standing behind a podium adorned with civil rights organization banners, she spoke not with anger, but with a calculated precision that captured the essence of institutional struggle. "This isn't about me," she would begin each speech, a refrain that became her trademark. "This is about the systems that continue to criminalize Black existence under the guise of bureaucratic neutrality." Marcus watched his mother's transformation with a mixture of pride and careful observation. The teenage boy who had once worried about family finances now understood he was witnessing a profound moment of social activism. He began taking notes during her speeches, recognizing the power of narrative and strategic communication. Her classroom at Westside Middle School became more than just an educational space. It transformed into a laboratory of critical thinking. Jasmine incorporated her experiences into curriculum discussions, teaching her students about civic engagement, legal rights, and the power of documented resistance. Her students, predominantly Black and brown teenagers, hung on her every word, seeing in her a living example of transformative power. The speaking engagements brought financial stability, but more importantly, they brought a platform. National magazines began featuring her. TEDx invited her to deliver a groundbreaking talk about intersectionality in judicial systems. Academic journals requested written contributions analyzing her experiences through theoretical frameworks of systemic racism. Her relationship with Marcus Mitchell Sr. evolved into a powerful co-parenting partnership focused on community empowerment. Their shared commitment to social justice transcended their past personal complications. Together, they developed community workshops teaching families how to document interactions with law enforcement, how to understand their legal rights. Professional opportunities emerged from unexpected places. The state's Department of Education invited her to consult on curriculum development, focusing on civic engagement and systemic awareness. Universities began offering her adjunct teaching positions in social justice programs. The financial compensation from speaking engagements and consulting work allowed her to establish the Mitchell Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal support and educational resources for families facing systemic challenges. What had begun as a personal struggle became an institutional mechanism for change. Local politicians began seeking her counsel. City council meetings where she testified became turning points in discussions about judicial reform. Her articulate, data-driven approach challenged traditional political discourse, forcing conversations that had long been avoided. Marcus Sr. recognized the deeper transformation. "You're not just fighting a system," he told her during a strategy planning session. "You're redesigning how we understand resistance." Her son Marcus integrated these lessons into his own emerging activism. He started a student organization at his high school focusing on civic engagement, documenting student rights, and creating peer support networks. The Mitchell approach to resistance was becoming generational. The speaking circuit took her across the country, from small community centers in rural towns to prestigious university auditoriums. Each venue presented an opportunity to transform personal pain into collective power. Jasmine Mitchell was no longer just responding to a $5,000 fine. She had become an architect of systemic change, turning a moment of potential defeat into a movement of profound transformation. Her message remained consistent. Resistance is not just about fighting. It's about reimagining. 6 months after the initial courthouse incident, the landscape of judicial accountability had fundamentally shifted. Judge Robert Hartley faced a comprehensive judicial review. His decades of unchecked bias finally brought into the harsh light of public scrutiny. The Mitchell lawsuit had become a catalyst for systemic examination that extended far beyond a single traffic violation. The legal resolution came not with a thunderous victory, but with a series of measured strategic changes. The court reduced Jasmine's original fine to a symbolic $250, accompanied by a formal acknowledgement of procedural irregularities. More significantly, the ruling included mandatory judicial bias training for all county court officials and a comprehensive review of fine assessment protocols. Marcus Reynolds considered it a multi-layered victory. The financial settlement was important, but the structural changes represented a more profound triumph. Local legal scholars began citing the case as a landmark moment in contemporary civil rights litigation. Jasmine Mitchell Foundation became a crucial resource for families navigating systemic challenges. What had begun as a personal struggle transformed into an institutional mechanism for change. The foundation provided free legal consultations, documentation workshops, and educational resources for communities fighting institutional bias. Her son Marcus, now deeply involved in youth activism, found his own path of resistance. He was accepted into a prestigious pre-law program, his personal narrative of family resilience becoming a powerful application essay. The teenage boy who had once worried about paying for dental work now saw himself as a future architect of systemic change. National civil rights organizations recognized the case's broader significance. The comprehensive documentation, strategic legal approach, and community mobilization became a blueprint for future resistance. Universities began teaching the Mitchell case as a contemporary example of effective social justice strategy. Judge Hartley's retirement came not as a defeat, but as a negotiated transition. The judicial review recommended he step down, with provisions that preserved his pension while acknowledging the systemic issues revealed through the case. It was less a personal punishment and more an institutional recalibration. The Mitchell family's approach had always been about transformation, not retribution. Jasmine continued teaching, her classroom now a laboratory of critical thinking and civic engagement. She incorporated her experiences into curriculum, teaching students not just about historical civil rights struggles, but about contemporary methods of resistance. Media coverage evolved from sensationalism to substantive analysis. What had initially been a local news story became a comprehensive examination of judicial practices, institutional racism, and community resilience. Documentaries, academic papers, and policy recommendations emerged from the initial incident. Marcus Mitchell Sr. reflected on the journey during a family dinner. This was never just about a fine, he told his son and Jasmine. This was about revealing the machinery of injustice and showing how community can redesign that machinery. The $5,000 fine had become something far more valuable, an investment in systemic change, a testament to the power of documented resistance, a reminder that individual stories can reshape collective narratives. As the Mitchell family gathered that evening, sharing a meal and discussing future strategies, they understood something profound. Their struggle was not an ending, but a continuous process of reimagining justice. Resistance, they had learned, was not a moment. It was a lifetime of deliberate, strategic hope.